Homage watches, are they harmless or toxic? So I personally define Homage watches as watches that are purposely made to look like an existing design. And I was wondering to myself, why is it that I'm okay with certain Homages but not others? And when I sat down to really think about this, I put Homages into 3 tiers. Tier 1, I would happily wear. Tier 2, it gets a little complicated. Some are okay and some are not. And at Tier 3, just don't go there. Pablo Picasso once said, "Good artists copy, great ones steal." So one watch that took a lot of flack for this was the Zenith Chronomaster Sport. When that watch came out, many people poo-pooed it for looking like a Rolex Daytona. Sure, I get the initial reaction, but the problem is if you look back far enough, everything has been done before. Every case shape, every type of hand, every dial color. Yes, the Zenith has a tri-compax Panda design with a black bezel, but so does a $200 Timex and a litany of other watches. The real question is, did Zenith do enough to try to differentiate themselves from the Daytona? And I would argue they did, because upon closer inspection, the Chronomaster has the tri-color subdials that are so distinctly Zenith. It also has that frantic 38,000 BPH movement that runs the chrono hand once every 10 seconds, so that's very unique. So I'd say it's different enough. Okay, maybe the clasp looks a little too close to the Daytona, but the point is this may have been a design that's heavily inspired by the Daytona, but they made a concerted effort to be different. Or take the Seiko tank. It's obviously borrowed from a Cartier, but look closer, you can see that at least for this popular model, the case proportions are totally different. Arguably uglier, but still different. So nobody who knows anything about watches is mistaking this for the real McCoy. I also love that when Patek came out with the Cubitus, we had all these people yelling, "Oh, Maine, the micro brand already made that watch." And most of these people probably didn't realize that the Maine Manhattan heavily draws upon the Vacheron Constantin Royal chronometer. And I think that's fine. And Maine probably noticed a very unique vintage watch that was not well known and made something that was heavily inspired by it. I do wish that they made this inspiration more clear on their website. My take is if you're gonna homage, then pay homage. Then we have this brand L'Aventure. It seems that their design philosophy is just to combine the best elements from the most famous watches to make a super watch. So here, for example, I see a Nautilus case, a Nautilus bracelet, with a Rolex GMT bezel and maybe a sandwich style like a Panerai. I mean, it's not ugly, and after a couple of beers, I'd probably rock this thing, but it's kind of weird. It's like if you grafted Halle Berry's head onto Pamela Anderson's body. Is it attractive? Maybe, but it's still this kind of alien, unoriginal thing. So in Tier 1, these companies at least made a point to change things up from existing designs. And in Tier 2, they get even lazier and just slap their own logos onto someone else's design. So here I'm talking about companies like Pagani Design, San Martin, a whole list of other offenders. Look, I've helped design a couple watches before, and a bezel insert may have like a dozen decisions that go into it. So disregarding any legal ramifications of this is just disrespectful to hardworking watch designers out there to be rewarding these companies by paying them to copy someone else's homework. I do think San Martin is making some recent strides in creating their own original designs, and I commend them for that. But you know, even big companies like Timex sometimes I feel like fly too close to the sun. I know everybody makes like a Submariner copy, but do we really need a Timex Speedy? Do we need a Timex Black Bay Pro? So one argument that I hear from a lot of people is that maybe they're buying a Homage because they're trying to try the watch on, see if they want the real thing one day. I get it. I've done this before. In my early collecting days, I used to have a Tissell Explorer, but I gotta tell you, I can't say it was really that helpful as a dry run for a real Rolex. I mean, I remember not knowing if the case proportions were quite exact or if the level of finishing is identical. You're definitely not mimicking the Rolex bracelet experience, one of the best in the industry. So I'd say if you're wondering how an Explorer or a GMT Master might wear, go to a place like WatchCrunch. Download the app, talk to members who own the actual watch, maybe go to a meetup or an AD and try these watches on. It's much better, again, than buying something that feels fake and rewarding companies for plagiarizing. Okay, here there's a bit of a caveat. I'm gonna make an exception for DIY watches and vintage homages. So I've built a few Seiko mods before, and I found that really rewarding. For example, this Legend Diver I made out of a Seiko 5, and I even took off the 5 logo and glued it at the 12 for the new dial. I wore that watch with pride, knowing that it was the result of hours of work, and it was something unique that may be the only one out there. I wanted to see a combination of Omega broad arrow hands on a Rolex Explorer dial, so I committed the sin of hacking up a SARB 033 and made this abomination, and I absolutely adore wearing it still. Also, for some reason, I feel better about vintage homages than modern ones. So look at this Seiko Submariner with the red text on the dial. I impulse bought this off like a Facebook ad, and it's fun. Yes, it's a copy of a red sub, but look, I'm not gonna pay $30,000 for a red sub. And even if I did, I probably wouldn't wear it carefree like this. Look at this WMT. They do great vintage homages. This one is sort of a copy of a vintage Rolex GMT Master with the Bakelite bezel. It doesn't have a GMT hand, but that's another story. I love how they did sort of Fotina on the hands on the bezel, but it's not evenly aged, so it looks real and not like too perfect. Unlike new models, you can't really just go out and buy these watches. And so I think that's why vintage homages are cool. Buying and wearing a vintage watch is a big commitment with a huge amount of research required and taking on a significant amount of risk. For example, a vintage watch dealer recently told me that there's pretty much no vintage 1016 Explorers with all original parts. That's scary. But for a few $100, you can get like 80% of the experience. And by putting like Seiko or WMT on the dial, you're declaring to the world that this is not a Rolex. So personally, I give a pass to the vintage homages because they just don't sort of give me the ick of modern ones. So a few years ago, I bought a Panerai off Reddit. In retrospect, the price was too good and it showed up with no box and paper, so it was kind of suspicious. And when I went to sell it, it turned out to be a fake. And I was devastated. I eventually made a video where I tore that watch apart and turned it into an epoxy table. But the point is, fake watches are not harmless. And I have had a bad experience and I hate them. There is a whole community dedicated to replica watches. And frankly, I find it terrifying. These watches, they've gotten so good that even watchmakers can't tell the difference anymore. But you know who can? You. If I bought a fake Rolex Daytona, every time I looked at my wrist, I'd remember how much of a piece of I am. God forbid, if another watch nerd came up to me and asked me about it, what am I gonna say? I either admit that it's a fake or I feel like a fake myself. Oh, you're flipping the bird to the watch industry. Actually, I think you're destroying the hobby from within. So this has happened recently in the sneaker industry. There's a big lawsuit going on right now where Nike is suing StockX because apparently a huge amount of merchandise labeled as authenticated by people are actually fake shoes. And look, when nobody knows if the thing that they're buying is real or fake anymore, the whole hobby kind of loses its luster. It's real disheartening to see, and I don't want that to happen to watches. So if you can't afford a Rolex or a Patek yet, you know, the chase is part of this journey. Keep it in your mind as like a grail watch that might motivate you. Or if you don't think luxury watches are really worth it, and in some ways I agree with that, there's so many great small brands nowadays. Brands that have really stellar design and build quality that sometimes rival the big Swiss names. No, you don't get as much heritage with a Notice or a Brew. It's not like you're getting that with a replica either. Okay, I feel like this is turning into like an unhinged watch rant, so I want to hear from you guys. Where do you draw the line with homage watches? Am I missing anything from my 3-tier system? Talk to me. I'm gonna go take a chill pill. I'll see you guys next time.